He found $50,000 in the rain. He gave it back. That decision almost got him killed. Ethan Carter had nothing left to lose. Or so he thought. One rainy night, a janitor's mop, a CEO's lost wallet, and a dead woman's secret collide in a storm that will shake a billion-dollar empire to its core. If you've ever been knocked down so many times you forgot what standing felt like, this story is for you. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And don't forget to like if you stay until the end. The rain had been falling since 6 o'clock, and by midnight, it had turned into the kind of heavy, relentless downpour that made the whole city feel like it was being punished for something. Ethan Carter pushed his maintenance cart down the corridor of the Sterling Horizon underground parking structure, the wheels squeaking against the wet concrete with every step. The sound echoed off the walls in a way that always reminded him how empty this place got after hours. Just him, the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, and the smell of exhaust that never fully cleared no matter how many times he mopped. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that a good night's sleep fixes, the kind that builds up over years. Unpaid bills, cold dinners eaten standing over the kitchen sink, a daughter who needed new shoes but asked for nothing because she was 7 years old and already understood more about their life than she should. Ethan pulled a rag from his belt and wiped down the side mirror of a black Mercedes. Executive row. The reserved spaces near the private elevator. He wasn't supposed to linger here longer than necessary. Management had made that clear during orientation 3 years ago. You clean, you move on. You don't touch anything that isn't yours. He never had. He crouched down to collect a crushed paper cup near the drain, and that's when he saw it. A wallet. Dark brown leather, thick, sitting half hidden in the shadow between the front tire of a silver Aston Martin and the painted curb. Someone had kicked it there without noticing, or dropped it getting out of the car in a hurry. Ethan picked it up. It was heavier than expected. He stood under one of the overhead lights and turned it over in his hands. No visible damage, quality stitching. The kind of wallet that cost more than his monthly rent. He opened it carefully, the way you open something that doesn't belong to you. There was a company ID card tucked behind a clear window panel. Isabella Vane, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Horizon Corporation. He stared at the name for a moment. He'd never seen her in person. She rarely came to the building after hours. But everyone who worked at Sterling Horizon knew who Isabella Vane was. You couldn't work there for 3 years and not know. Her name was on the lobby wall. Her photo was in the annual report that got framed and hung near the security desk every January. He kept looking through the wallet. Not digging, just enough to find a contact number or something to indicate where it should go. What he found instead stopped him cold. Cash. A thick brick of it, bound with a paper band. He didn't count it right there, but it was enough that his brain registered the number before he even touched it. 50s and 100s stacked tight. He set the wallet on the hood of the nearest car and carefully lifted the cash partition. Beneath it was a small black drive, no bigger than his thumb, with a strip of red tape across one end. And behind the drive, folded in half and tucked into the inner leather pocket, was a piece of paper. He unfolded it. 6 words printed in block letters. Pay or everything goes public. Ethan stood very still. The rain hammered the ceiling grate above the ramp entrance. One of the fluorescent lights down the corridor buzzed and flickered. His cart sat crooked against the wall 15 feet away, the mop handle leaning at an angle. He read the note again. Then he put everything back exactly as he'd found it, the drive, the cash, the note, and closed the wallet. He stood there for a long moment with the wallet in his hand, water dripping from the edge of his uniform sleeve. $50,000. He didn't count it. He didn't need to. He could feel it. He knew what it meant without doing the math. It meant the gap in his checking account that had kept him awake 4 nights last week. It meant his daughter Lily's inhaler prescription that he'd had to split across 2 separate payments last month because he couldn't cover it in one shot. It meant the letter sitting on his kitchen counter, the one from the property management company with the red final notice stamp across the top that he kept turning face down so Lily wouldn't ask about it. $50,000 was not just money to Ethan Carter. It was the answer to every question that had kept him up since the night his wife didn't come home. He thought about Rachel. He always thought about Rachel at the worst moments, because the worst moments were the ones she was supposed to help him survive. Ethan put the wallet in the front pocket of his maintenance cart, covered it with a folded microfiber cloth, and finished his shift. He got home at 2:47 in the morning. The apartment was quiet in the specific way it always was when Lily was asleep. A kind of stillness that was different from just silence, heavier and more careful, like the whole building was trying not to wake her up. He checked on her first thing, the way he always did. She was curled on her side with one arm hanging off the mattress, her hair fanned out across the pillow. Her breathing was steady. He stood in the doorway for a minute just watching her breathe. Then he went to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and put the wallet in front of him. He poured himself a glass of water. He didn't drink it. He stared at the wallet for a long time, turned the glass around in his hands. The refrigerator hummed. The upstairs neighbor's floor creaked once and then went quiet. He opened the wallet again, this time more deliberately. He counted the cash. $52,400. He sat with that number in the kitchen of a two-bedroom apartment where the hallway radiator had been broken since February, where the landlord hadn't responded to 3 repair requests, where Lily drew pictures on the backs of junk mail envelopes because art supplies were not in the budget. He thought about what $52,400 could do. He could clear the debt, pay the back rent, buy Lily the kind of backpack that didn't have a broken zipper, schedule the dental appointment he'd been postponing for himself since last spring, put something in savings, actually put something in savings, not just intend to and then watch it disappear into groceries and utilities before the month was over. He could breathe. He thought about the note. Pay or everything goes public. Someone was blackmailing Isabella Vane. Someone had planted this wallet, or gotten close enough to take it and slip the note inside. This wasn't a woman who carelessly lost her wallet. This was a setup, a warning. And the drive hidden inside it almost certainly held whatever leverage was being threatened. Ethan was holding the center of someone else's war. He thought about keeping the money and walking away. He thought about it the way you think about the thing you know you won't do but can't stop yourself from imagining, full and clear and honest in the privacy of your own head. He could take the cash and leave the drive and the note in a building mailbox. Anonymous. No trace. Who would even know? He would know. He put the cash back. He folded the note the same way he'd found it. He closed the wallet, set it on the counter next to his keys, and went to bed. He lay on his back in the dark for a while, staring at the ceiling, thinking that he was either a good man or a foolish one, and that sometimes those two things were impossible to tell apart. The next morning, Lily made him a drawing before school. She did this sometimes, left little pieces of paper on the kitchen table for him to find when he came out of the bedroom. This one was a picture of the two of them, drawn in orange crayon, standing in front of a house with a green yard and what looked like a dog. Though it might have been a cat, it was hard to tell with Lily's art. He picked it up and held it for a second. "Is that a dog?" he called toward the bathroom, where he could hear her brushing her teeth. "It's a horse," she called back, mouth full. "We can't afford a horse, Lily." "It's a pretend horse, Dad." He set the drawing down carefully and made her breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, half an orange because she'd decided last week that she liked oranges now, a development that had cost him an extra $4 at the grocery store, but that he had accepted without complaint. She came out in her school clothes, jeans, a purple shirt with a small stain on the sleeve that he'd scrubbed twice and still hadn't gotten out, and climbed onto her chair. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because I'm always fine." She looked at him the way she sometimes did, with the kind of direct, unimpressed attention that she must have inherited from Rachel because Ethan had never been able to do it. "Your eyes look like you didn't sleep." "I slept." "How much?" "Enough." He put her plate in front of her. "Eat your eggs before they get cold." She ate. He stood by the counter and drank his coffee and watched her, and thought about the wallet sitting on the counter 3 feet away under a folded dish towel. After he dropped her at school, he drove to Sterling Horizon. He hadn't been to the executive floor before. Maintenance worked the lower levels and the parking structure. The upper floors were a different world. Marble in the lobby, glass partitions, the kind of quiet that came from money, not from emptiness. The woman at the reception desk on the 34th floor looked at him the way people sometimes looked at Ethan when he showed up somewhere he wasn't expected. Not rude exactly, just assessing. "I need to return something to Ms. Vane," he said. "Her wallet. I found it last night in the parking structure. The receptionist's expression shifted slightly. I'll let her assistant know. You can leave it with me, and I'd like to give it to her directly. She studied him for a moment. I'm afraid that's not... It's important, Ethan said. The wallet? There's something inside it. I think she needs to know that I found it and that I didn't go through it more than I had to. She should hear that from me. Something about the way he said it, not aggressive, not demanding, just plain and tired and honest, made the receptionist pick up the phone. He waited 20 minutes in a chair outside a glass-walled conference room, still in his regular clothes, the wallet sitting in his jacket pocket. People walked past without looking at him. Someone rolled a rack of document boxes down the hall. A man in a suit talked quietly into his phone near the elevator bank, laughing at something. Then a door opened at the far end of the hallway. He heard it before he saw her, the quiet mechanical sound of a power wheelchair moving across hardwood floor. He stood up without thinking. Isabella Vane was not what he'd expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he had expected. She was younger than he'd assumed from the lobby portrait, or maybe the portrait made her look more formal than she was. Dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes, a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. The wheelchair was sleek and clearly expensive, but that wasn't what you noticed first. What you noticed first was the way she looked at him, with a wariness that she made no effort to disguise. She stopped about 6 feet from him. You're the maintenance worker who found my wallet. Yes, ma'am. Ethan Carter. I work the B2 and B3 parking levels. And you insisted on returning it personally. It wasn't a question. There was something careful in her voice, like she was already waiting for whatever came next. He reached into his jacket and held the wallet out toward her. Everything's inside. I didn't take anything. She didn't move to take it immediately. How do I know that? You don't, he said, but I counted the cash. 52.4. The drive is still there. So is the note. Something changed in her expression, a tightening around her eyes that she controlled quickly, but not quickly enough. What note? She said. The one folded behind the drive. 6 words. You know which one. A long silence. Down the hall, someone laughed at something on their phone. A printer beeped once. Isabella Vane looked at him for a moment that stretched longer than was comfortable. Come in, she said finally, and turned the wheelchair toward the conference room. Close the door. He sat across the table from the most powerful person in the building, in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that was still gray and damp from last night's rain, and he told her exactly what had happened. What time he found it, where it was sitting, that he'd opened it to find a contact, that he'd seen the contents, that he'd gone home and thought about what to do. He told her the last part without flinching. I thought about keeping the money, he said. I want to be straight with you about that. I thought about it. She watched him steadily. But you didn't. No. Why not? He looked at the table for a second. It was a long conference table, polished dark wood, the kind that reflected the ceiling lights back at you. I've got a daughter. She's 7. Her mother died when she was 3. He looked back up. I've been trying to raise her right, teach her that how you do things matters, not just what you get at the end. He paused. I couldn't keep money that wasn't mine and then look her in the face. Isabella Vane was quiet for a moment. Mr. Carter, she said, that note wasn't in my wallet when I left my car last night. He looked at her. Someone put it there, she said. Someone took my wallet, added the drive and the note, and placed it where they knew it would be found. Her jaw tightened. They wanted it discovered, just not by you. He let that sit for a second. Who did they want to find it? Someone who could use it against me. She looked down at the wallet on the table between them. Someone who would. The rain had stopped outside the window, but the sky was still the color of wet concrete, and the city below them looked small and indifferent and complicated in the way that cities always did when you looked at them from high enough up. Ethan didn't know yet what any of this meant, didn't know whose war he'd walked into, or what the drive contained, or how far this thing reached. He was a maintenance worker who'd found something he wasn't supposed to find and done the only thing he knew how to do. But sitting in that room, looking at the woman across from him, the woman who had built an empire and been brought to this moment by someone who worked beside her, he had the particular and unsettling feeling that returning the wallet hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning. Isabella didn't call security. That was the first thing Ethan noticed when he walked out of the conference room. No one came to escort him out. No one took his badge. No one treated him like a problem that needed to be managed. She simply told him she would be in touch, and the way she said it wasn't dismissive. It was the voice of someone who meant what they said and didn't feel the need to explain themselves further. He took the elevator back down to the maintenance level, changed out of his street clothes into his uniform, and spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning things. That was the thing about his job that nobody talked about. It gave you a lot of time to think. Long stretches of corridor, repetitive motion, the kind of work that occupied your hands without touching your mind. He thought about the note, pay or everything goes public. He thought about the drive, small and red-taped and carrying whatever weight someone had decided was worth using as a weapon. He thought about the look on Isabella Vane's face when he'd told her the note wasn't something he'd added, when she'd understood he already knew what it said. She hadn't been afraid exactly. Afraid wasn't the right word for it. It was more like the expression of someone who had suspected something was wrong for a long time and had just received confirmation. He went home that evening, made dinner, helped Lily with a worksheet about fractions that neither of them fully understood, and told himself that whatever happened next was not his business. He believed that for about 36 hours. The call came on a Thursday evening while he was standing in the laundromat 2 blocks from his apartment, watching Lily's school clothes tumble in the dryer. His phone showed a number he didn't recognize, a main office line, the kind that didn't show a name. "Mr. Carter," Isabella's voice, crisp but not cold. "I need to speak with you, not on the phone." He looked at the dryer. Lily was sitting on the bench beside him, reading a library book about deep-sea fish, her feet not quite reaching the floor. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, before your shift. I can have someone pick you up at 7. He thought about saying no. He thought about how every instinct he had was telling him that the right move was to stay completely clear of whatever this was, that he'd done his part by returning the wallet, that a single father with a 7-year-old and a broken radiator had absolutely no business getting anywhere near a corporate conspiracy. "I'll drive myself," he said. "Where?" She gave him an address that wasn't the Sterling Horizon building. "A private location," she said. He wrote it on the back of his hand with a pen he borrowed from the woman folding laundry at the next machine over. Lily looked up from her book. "Who was that?" "Work stuff," he said. She looked at him for a second with those eyes that saw too much and then went back to her fish. Bad. The address was a townhouse in a quiet residential neighborhood, about 20 minutes from downtown. The kind of block where the trees were old and the houses sat back from the sidewalk behind small iron fences. A private residence, clearly, though nothing about it screamed wealth from the outside. Just a brownstone with clean windows and a ramp built into the front steps that hadn't been there long, the concrete still looking newer than the rest of the facade. A man met him at the door, mid-40s, heavy-shouldered, the kind of face that had clearly taken a few hits in its lifetime and hadn't bothered to be upset about it. He introduced himself as Garrett, said he was Isabella's head of private security, and showed Ethan into a front sitting room with a low couch and a coffee table and no small talk. Isabella was already there. She looked different outside the office. Same sharpness, but the corporate armor was gone. She was wearing a gray pullover and dark slacks, her hair loose instead of pinned back, and she was holding a coffee mug that she set down on the table when he came in. The wheelchair was a different one from yesterday, slightly less formal looking. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She didn't waste time. "The drive is encrypted. My technical team has been working on it since yesterday morning. They've broken part of the outer layer, each right. Enough to identify the file structure, but not the contents yet." She paused. "What they could identify is the metadata on the file creation. The oldest files on that drive were created almost 4 years ago." Ethan waited. "That's before my accident," she said. "Before I used a wheelchair. Before a lot of things." She looked at him steadily. "Someone has been building this case against me for a very long time. Whoever planted that wallet was either the person who built it or was paid by them. The drive is meant to look like it contains evidence of financial crimes I committed. Account transfers, shell company documentation, correspondence." Her jaw tightened slightly. "None of it is real, but it's built carefully enough that it would take months to disprove, and by the time anyone finished disproving it, the company's stock would be worthless and I'd be in litigation for the rest of my life." "So, someone inside the company," Ethan said. Yes. Someone with enough access to build 4 years of fake documentation. Yes. She picked up her coffee mug and then put it back down without drinking from it. And someone who knew my movements well enough to know exactly when my car would be in that parking spot, and for how long, and that the window between me leaving and the parking structure being cleaned was small enough that whoever they sent to retrieve it after it was found by the right person, not by you, would have time. They expected someone else to find it. The CFO parks 2 spaces down from me. He works late on wet days. Something moved across her expression. The plan was for Marcus to find it, to come to me with it, to offer to make it go away. She shook her head slightly. It rained heavier than expected. He left early. Ethan sat with that for a moment. The whole thing had hinged on a rainstorm and a parking spot and the wrong person walking by at the wrong time, or the right time, depending on how you looked at it. Miss Vane, he said, I appreciate you explaining this to me, but I have to ask, why are you explaining it to me? I'm a maintenance worker. I swept floors for 3 years in your building without anyone on this floor knowing my name. I gave you back your wallet. That's the whole of it. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that he started to wonder if he'd said something wrong. Your wife's name was Rachel Carter, she said. The air in the room changed. He didn't move. Yes. She worked at Sterling Horizon, in our internal compliance division, 4 years ago. His hands, which had been resting on his knees, went still in a different way. Not relaxed still, braced still. She was there for 8 months, he said, before she got sick. Isabella shook her head slowly. That's what she told you. He stared at her. What? Rachel Carter didn't leave Sterling Horizon because she got sick. Isabella's voice was careful, measured, but there was something underneath it, something that wasn't quite guilt but was close. She left because someone made it very clear to her that continuing to work there would be dangerous, for her and for the people she cared about. The room was very quiet. She found something, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. It came out of him slowly, like something that had always been waiting to be said. She found the beginning of it, Isabella said. The early account irregularities, transfers that didn't match the documentation. She flagged it internally, which means she flagged it to compliance, which means the report went to the CFO's office. A pause. To Marcus Vale. Ethan heard his own breathing. By the time I learned any of this, Isabella said, Rachel had already left the company. I was told she resigned voluntarily for personal reasons. I had no reason to question it. She stopped. I should have questioned it. That's something I have to live with. He stood up. He didn't do it aggressively. He just needed to not be sitting down. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her for a moment, looking out at the street. An older man was walking a small dog along the sidewalk. The dog kept stopping to sniff things. Normal morning. Completely normal morning. She told me she got sick, he said. She said she had to stop working because she was tired all the time and the doctors wanted to run tests. He turned around. She was sick. She was actually sick, but she was already gone from the company by then. Yes. Did someone... He stopped, started again. Did someone make her sick? Isabella didn't answer immediately, and the pause was its own kind of answer. We don't know. The investigation is still early. What we know is that she found evidence of large-scale fraud, reported it through internal channels that were controlled by the person committing the fraud, and within 3 weeks she was gone from the company, and within 6 months she was dead. Her voice didn't waver, but it was careful in the specific way of someone who understood the weight of what they were saying. Whether those things are connected in the worst way you're imagining, I cannot tell you yet. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a second. Just a second. Then he dropped it. What do you need from me? He said. The drive. She leaned forward slightly. My team has most of it, but there's an inner encryption layer they can't break. It's not a standard algorithm. It's customized, personal, the kind of thing someone builds from a combination of data that only they know. She paused. Or that only someone close to them would know. He understood what she was asking before she finished. You think Rachel built it? He said. I think Rachel took copies of what she found before she left. I think she hid them on that drive. And I think whoever stole the drive from her, or found it after her death, added their own fabricated material on top of her real files and used the whole thing as a weapon. Isabella's eyes were direct and steady, but Rachel's files are still in there underneath, and the key to unlocking them is something she would have chosen, something personal, something that meant something to her. He thought about his wife. He thought about the woman who had made him coffee every morning, even after she started getting tired, who had kept a journal she never let him read, who had hummed the same 3 songs on rotation while she cooked dinner, who had cried at the end of every nature documentary, regardless of whether it was sad. "I don't know if I can help you with that," he said honestly. "I know you might not be able to, but you're the only person left who knew her well enough to try." He drove home slowly. He sat in the car in the parking lot of his building for a while before going upstairs, engine off, hands in his lap. The morning was cool and bright, the kind of fall day that felt clean after days of rain. A couple of kids were riding bikes in the lot. One of them did something impressive on his bike, and the other one said something that made the first one laugh. Rachel had found something at work and never told him. He kept turning that over, not with anger, or not only with anger, with the specific sadness of realizing there had been a version of his wife he hadn't fully known. A woman who had been scared enough to keep something that big to herself, who had decided to protect him from it, who had walked out of a job where she'd discovered serious crimes and come home and said she was tired and needed to rest, and smiled at Lily and made coffee in the mornings, and never once let him see that she was carrying something that heavy. He wondered if she'd been trying to protect him. He wondered if she'd been planning to tell him when she had more to show. He wondered if she'd been planning to tell him at all, or if she'd decided somewhere in the private part of herself that marriage didn't automatically give you access to, that this was hers to handle. He would never know which one it was. He went upstairs, made Lily's lunch, walked her to school, and came home to a quiet apartment and the drawing of the pretend horse still on the kitchen table. He sat down and tried to think about what Rachel would have used as a password. Not the obvious things. Not birthdays, not their anniversary, not Lily's name. Rachel was too careful for the obvious things. She was the person in their relationship who remembered to change the smoke detector batteries and read the terms of service on things, and backed up her phone. She was methodical in a way that Ethan had always admired because he was not. He tried to remember the things she'd cared about, the specific, private things. Not her public self, not the Rachel who laughed at parties and remembered everyone's names and brought food to neighbors when they were sick. The Rachel who existed in the small hours, who stayed up reading things that bothered her, who took notes in the margins of books with a very specific green pen she'd had since college and replaced with the exact same model 3 times because she didn't want a different one. He thought about a conversation they'd had, maybe a year before she died. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table late at night with a cup of tea gone cold beside her, looking at nothing in particular, and he'd asked her what she was thinking about, and she'd said, almost to herself, not really to him, "I keep thinking about how many things only exist because somebody decided not to look away." He hadn't known what she meant then. He thought he might know now. He called Isabella that afternoon. "I want to see the drive," he said. "Whatever your team has already accessed, and whatever's still locked. I want to look at the file names, the folder structures, anything that's visible without the decryption key." "I can arrange that," she said. "How soon?" "Tomorrow." A short pause. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mr. Carter?" He looked at the drawing on the table, the pretend horse, the orange crayon, the 2 small stick figures standing in front of a house with a green yard. "I've been not sure about things for 4 years," he said. "I'm done with that." So Garrett met him the next morning in the basement of the townhouse, which had been converted into something that looked less like a residence and more like a small operations center. 3 monitors on a folding table, a compact server unit humming in the corner, a woman in her 30s sitting in front of the screens who introduced herself as Priya and shook his hand without looking away from the monitors. "File tree's up," she said. "Outer layer's gone. The inner encryption is here." She pointed at the screen. A folder structure, grayed out, labeled only with numbers and dates. Everything in the gray folders is locked. The white ones are the fabricated material. That's what Vale's people added. We've already documented those. Ethan leaned in and looked at the folder names. Most of them meant nothing to him. Strings of numbers, date formats, abbreviations that were probably internal Sterling Horizon codes. But toward the bottom of the tree there was a folder with a different naming format. It was labeled NLW-032. He stared at it. "That one," he said. Priya looked at him. "You recognize it?" "NLW." He said it slowly. Rachel had a thing she used to say. "Nobody looks away." She said it when she was frustrated about things being ignored, people not doing the right thing. He swallowed. It was kind of her personal. She didn't call it a motto. She just said it a lot. Priya's hands were already moving over the keyboard. "And 32? He thought. 32. March 2nd. No, that wasn't right. Not a date. He thought about the green pen, about the books with the margin notes, about the night she'd been up late at the kitchen table. She was 32 when she started working at Sterling Horizon, he said slowly. Priya typed. The screen sat still for a moment. Then the gray folder turned white. The room was very quiet. "It's open," Priya said, and her voice was different now, quieter, steadier, the voice of someone who understood that what they were looking at mattered. Inside the folder were files. Dozens of them. Spreadsheets, PDFs, scanned documents, a folder of photographs, a text file at the top of the list labeled simply, "Read first." Priya opened it. It was a letter. Not addressed to anyone by name, addressed to whoever found it. The writing was organized and careful, the way Rachel did everything, but underneath the organization you could feel the urgency, the way someone writes when they're not sure how much time they have. Ethan read it standing up, leaning over the desk, and he did not make any sound. Rachel had found the fraud 8 months into her time at Sterling Horizon. Account transfers being rerouted through a series of subsidiary companies, siphoning money from client trust accounts in amounts small enough to avoid automatic flags, large enough that over 4 years the total had reached somewhere north of $90 million. She had documented everything she could access. She had tried to report it internally and been stonewalled. She had thought about going to the authorities and been warned. The letter was careful about the details of the warning, but the language was clear enough. She had been told, in terms she believed, that if she continued to push on this, people she loved would be hurt. So she had left. She had taken everything she'd copied and hidden it, and she had left, and she had come home to Ethan and Lily and said she was tired, and she had carried it alone for the rest of her life. "If you're reading this," the letter ended, "then I wasn't able to do this myself. Whoever you are, please finish it. Don't look away." Ethan straightened up. Garrett was standing in the doorway behind him. Priya had turned slightly in her chair, watching him without trying to look like she was watching him. "How complete is this?" Ethan asked. His voice came out level. He didn't know how. "Extensive," Priya said quietly. "This is, Mr. Carter, this is a complete evidentiary record. Account numbers, transfer logs, correspondence, timestamps. If this is authenticated, it's not something you can argue your way out of in court." "Can it be authenticated?" "Yes, the metadata is clean, the file origins are traceable." She paused. "This is real." He nodded once. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd left it. "I need to talk to Isabella," he said. She was upstairs in the sitting room, and when he came through the door, she read his face immediately, the way people who are good at reading rooms do. "You found it," she said. "Rachel found it," he said, 4 years ago. And then she protected everyone except herself. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the front window, the street was going about its ordinary business. A delivery truck idling, someone walking fast with their phone out, 2 women talking on the corner. "I'm sorry," Isabella said. "I know that isn't enough." "It's not nothing," Ethan said. He sat down. The couch made the same low sound it had made the first time he sat on it. "What do we do with it?" "We have to move carefully. Marcus still doesn't know the drive has been accessed. As far as he knows, his plan is still in motion." She turned her wheelchair slightly, the way he'd noticed she did when she was thinking. A small, unconscious movement, like some people tap their fingers. He thinks the wallet is still lost. He thinks either it was never found, or it was found and the money was taken and the drive was discarded. She looked at Ethan. "He doesn't know about you." "So we have time." "Some. Not a lot." Her expression sharpened. He'll start to get nervous when his retrieval contact doesn't check in. That gives us maybe 72 hours before he starts making moves to cover himself. Ethan looked at the window. The delivery truck had moved on. The two women on the corner had gone in opposite directions. He thought about Rachel sitting up late at the kitchen table, looking at nothing, carrying $90 million worth of someone else's crimes in her head while he slept 15 feet away. He thought about Lily drawing horses in orange crayon. "Then we don't waste the time," he said. Isabella looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, in the particular way of someone who has spent a long time being in charge of things and recognizes, occasionally, when someone else in the room is steady enough to be trusted. "No," she agreed, "we don't." The plan, such as it was, lived on a single sheet of paper that Isabella kept folded in the side pocket of her wheelchair. She didn't write things on whiteboards or keep running documents on shared servers. Not anymore. Not with someone inside the company who had access to everything. Paper. One copy. Her handwriting, which was small and precise and slightly left-leaning in the way of someone who'd been told as a child to correct it and hadn't fully managed. Ethan saw it once, briefly, when she unfolded it on the coffee table between them. He didn't ask to read it. She didn't offer. What she did tell him was the shape of it. They needed 3 things before they could move. Authentication of Rachel's files by an outside forensic accountant who had no connection to Sterling Horizon, a secure line to a federal investigator that Garrett had worked with before and trusted in the specific, limited way that you trust someone you've never needed to trust with your life. And Marcus Vale kept calm and unaware for long enough that he didn't start destroying evidence or moving money or doing any of the other things that people who had been stealing for 4 years would do if they felt the walls beginning to close. That last part was the hardest, because Marcus Vale was not a stupid man. "He built this over 4 years, Isabella said. They were sitting in the townhouse again, the afternoon light coming through the front window at a low angle. Garrett was in the hallway, on the phone with someone he referred to only as my contact at the bureau. Priya was downstairs, still cataloging Rachel's files. He is patient and careful, and he understands how I think because he's watched me operate for a long time. If I behave differently, if I call a meeting I wouldn't normally call, or avoid one I should attend, or if I look at him the wrong way in a corridor, he'll know something has changed." "So you go back to work," Ethan said. "Monday morning. Normal schedule. Board prep meeting in the afternoon, which he'll be in. I sit across the table from him and I act like nothing has happened." She said it the way you say something you've already decided, not the way you say something you're still convincing yourself of. But her hand, resting on the arm of her wheelchair, was not entirely still. Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything about it. "What do I do?" he asked. "You go back to work too. You do your shift, you clean the parking structure, you don't change anything about how you move through that building." She looked at him. "And you don't come near the 34th floor." "And my daughter?" A pause. Isabella looked at the window. "Garrett has someone he trusts, a woman named Solis. She can be near Lily's school without being visible." She turned back to him. "I don't think Marcus knows about you yet, but if he starts pulling surveillance footage from the parking structure and sees you pick up the wallet, your face will come up. You're saying there's a version of this where he figures it out. I'm saying I want to be ready if he does." Ethan sat with that. He thought about Lily at her desk in 2nd grade, doing math worksheets, completely unaware that her father was sitting in a private townhouse with a billionaire CEO working out how to keep a corporate criminal from deciding she was leverage. The image was so far outside the normal coordinates of his life that it produced a kind of unreality. Not fear exactly, more like the sensation of standing in a room and suddenly noticing how far the ceiling was from the floor. "Okay," he said. "What else?" "The forensic accountant needs 48 hours minimum to go through Rachel's files and produce a report we can hand to investigators. That's our clock. 48 hours from when Priya finishes packaging the data, which she estimates will be tonight." She looked at him steadily. "So 72 hours from right now is our hard deadline. Whatever position we're in at that point, that's when we move. And if Marcus figures it out before then?" Isabella's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Then we move faster." He went back to work that evening. B2 and B3, the same route he'd walked 100 times, mop and cart, and the particular squeak of the wheels that he'd been meaning to report to the supply room and kept forgetting. The parking structure was half empty on a Friday night. Most of the executive spaces clear. A few mid-level staff cars still in the general area, the fluorescent lights doing what they always did. He cleaned the space where he'd found the wallet. He didn't stand over it or mark it in any way. He just cleaned it, the way he cleaned everything, and moved on. Marcus Vale's car was in its space. A dark blue sedan, conservative-looking for a man who controlled access to a 9-figure company. Ethan didn't look at it any longer than he looked at any other car. He was aware of the camera in the upper corner of the structure, the one that covered this section of the executive row. He'd known about it for 3 years. He just never had a reason to think about what it was recording. He finished his shift at 2 a.m. and drove home and checked on Lily and stood in the kitchen for a while in the dark, not turning on the light. Rachel had walked this same route, in a sense. Not the parking structure, not the mop and cart, but the particular path of knowing something dangerous and trying to figure out what to do about it while everyone around you went about their ordinary lives. She'd sat at this kitchen table and done that. In this kitchen. And he hadn't known. He turned on the light, made tea he didn't drink, went to bed. Saturday passed in the specific agony of having to act normal when nothing was normal. He took Lily to the park in the morning. She wanted to try the climbing structure she'd been eyeing for weeks, a tall wooden frame with cargo nets and a rope bridge that swayed when you walked on it. He stood below and watched her climb with the focused intensity she brought to physical challenges, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating hard on something. She made it to the top and looked down at him with an expression of absolute satisfaction. "Did you see that?" "I saw it. I did it without stopping even once." "I know, I was watching the whole time." She climbed down and ran over to him, slightly out of breath, and he crouched down and she threw her arms around his neck the way she still did sometimes, still unself-conscious about it, and he held on a beat longer than usual. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," he said into her hair. "I'm okay." He saw Solis once, briefly, a woman in her mid-30s sitting on a bench near the park entrance with a coffee and a book, not watching Lily but positioned such that she could see the whole playground. She never looked at him directly. He looked at her once and then looked away. He was grateful in a way that was uncomfortable, the way it's uncomfortable to need something you didn't ask for. They got lunch at a diner they went to sometimes. Lily got a grilled cheese and ate half of it and then decided she was full and then ate the other half anyway. Ethan got coffee and an omelet and managed most of it. "Can we get a fish?" Lily asked. "A fish?" "Like a pet fish in a tank. I saw one at Maya's house, and it was really pretty. It was orange and white." "That's a clownfish," she pointed at him. "See, you already know about them. That means you're ready." "That's not what that means." "I think it kind of is." He looked at her across the table. She was looking back at him with the completely straight face she used when she was being funny on purpose, which was a Rachel thing, that exact expression, the deliberate deadpan. He felt it hit him the way it sometimes did, not gradually, but all at once, like stepping off a curb you didn't see. "We'll talk about the fish," he said. She accepted this as a win, which it probably was. 6. The call from Garrett came at 11 p.m. that night, after Lily was in bed. "Priya finished the package. Accountant has it. He started tonight." A pause. "Clock's running." "Understood," Ethan said. "There's something else." Garrett's voice shifted slightly. Not alarmed, but careful in a new way. "Vale's assistant booked a flight for Monday afternoon. Business class, open return. Destination is Geneva." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He's running." "Not yet. Maybe." Geneva is a possible destination for any number of legitimate business reasons. But the open return combined with the fact that he didn't tell Miss Vane's executive assistant about a planned international trip is notable. Does he know something? We don't know. Could be precautionary. Could be he's planning to move money before anything breaks. Could be a coincidence. Garrett didn't sound like he thought it was a coincidence. "Miss Vane wanted you to know. She's moving the timeline up. She needs the accountant to have something preliminary by Sunday evening." "Can he do that?" "She's asking him to try." After he hung up, Ethan stood at the window in the dark. The street below was quiet. A cat crossed under a streetlight and disappeared between two parked cars. Somewhere down the block, a door closed. 48 hours had just become 36, maybe less. Sunday morning, Ethan dropped Lily at her friend Maya's house. Maya's mother, Donna, was one of those women who had a gift for making everyone around her feel like everything was fine, and Ethan was grateful for it in a way he couldn't express without explaining things he wasn't going to explain. He told Donna he had some things to sort out, work stuff, might be a long day. Donna told him Lily could stay for dinner if needed. He thanked her twice, which she noticed and didn't comment on. He drove to the townhouse. The operations room in the basement had expanded overnight. There were now 2 additional monitors, a second folding table, and a man Ethan hadn't seen before. Early 50s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, jacket thrown over a chair, looking at a screen full of spreadsheet data with the concentration of someone doing surgery. This was the accountant, whose name was Harlan, and who shook Ethan's hand with the quick perfunctory grip of someone who was only briefly pausing from what he was actually doing. "Your wife's documentation is comprehensive," Harlan said, already turning back to the screen. She understood what she was looking at. She didn't just collect data, she organized it for presentation. Transfer sequences, matching them to the shell company structures, flagging the timestamps where the amounts were deliberately kept below auto-reporting thresholds. He scrolled through something. This is the work of someone who knew exactly what they were building and why. "She was good at her job," Ethan said. Harlan glanced at him. A quick look, brief enough to be almost nothing, but there was something in it. Recognition, maybe, of what it meant for a man to say that about his dead wife in this particular context. "Yes," he said simply. She was. Isabella was upstairs. She had a laptop open and was on a call when Ethan came into the sitting room, and she held up one finger without looking at him and finished the call in about 30 seconds, which felt like it was faster than the call was supposed to end. "Garrett told you about Geneva," she said. "Yeah. I've decided I'm going in today. To the office." She said it with the particular forward-leaning energy of someone who had spent the night arguing with themselves and reached a conclusion. Marcus has a habit of going in on Sunday afternoons. He calls it clearing the deck for the week. If he sees me there, working, not behaving differently, it might settle him. Or if he's already suspicious, it confirms that you're monitoring him. "I know." She looked at the window. "It's a judgment call." "Your judgment." "Yes." A pause. "But I'm telling you because if I'm wrong about it, things might move faster than expected today, and Garrett needs to know where you are." Ethan thought about Lily at Maya's house, drawing pictures and eating whatever snacks Donna put out and being completely, safely ordinary. He thought about Solis, who was presumably parked somewhere near the neighborhood. He thought about Rachel's files, downstairs, organized for presentation, the work of a woman who understood what she was building and why. "I'll stay close," he said. Isabella went to the office. Ethan stayed at the townhouse. Garrett drove her and came back and sat in the hallway with the patient, contained energy of someone used to waiting while things developed. Priya worked. Harlan worked. The afternoon went by in the particular suspended way of time when you are not doing anything but cannot stop thinking. At 4:17 p.m., Garrett's phone rang. He answered it in the hallway, his voice low. Ethan, sitting in the sitting room with a cup of coffee he had made himself because he needed to do something with his hands, heard the change in Garrett's tone without being able to make out the words. He set the cup down. Garrett came to the doorway. "Vale went to the server room." "What?" "Building security just flagged it to one of our people. He badged into the server room on the executive floor 20 minutes ago. He stayed for 11 minutes. What's in the server room?" "Backup storage, physical drives. The kind of thing that would only matter to someone who was worried about what existed on the company's backup systems." Garrett's face was doing the thing it sometimes did, staying very still when the situation was not. "He's covering his tracks." "Does Isabella know?" "I'm calling her now." He was already dialing. He stepped back into the hallway. Ethan stood up. He went to the basement stairs and leaned down. "Harlan?" Harlan looked up. "How much do you have?" Harlan took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. "Enough. Not everything. Enough to open an investigation and make it stick." "How long to write it up in a form someone can hand to a federal investigator?" Harlan looked at his screen, then back at Ethan. 2 hours. "Start now, Saab." The next 90 minutes were the kind that aged you. Garrett reached Isabella, who was 2 floors below the executive level when she got the call, and had the presence of mind to finish a perfectly normal-looking conversation with a woman from the legal department before walking to the elevator with her face completely composed. She came back to the townhouse at 5:30, and when she came through the front door, something about her was different. Not panicked, but accelerated, the way a person looks when they've shifted from planning mode to action mode and are still in the process of adjusting to the change. "He's moving tonight," she said. "Not Monday. Tonight." "You know that?" "He came by my office to tell me he needed to move the Geneva trip up. Family matter," he said. "He'd be back by Thursday." She pulled her jacket off and folded it across the arm of the couch, with the short, precise movements of someone managing their own adrenaline. "He's never in 20 years mentioned family when it came to international travel. He doesn't have family in Geneva." Garrett was on his phone again, standing near the window. Ethan heard him say the word "tonight" twice, and then something about documentation, and then a name that meant nothing to Ethan. A federal contact, presumably, being brought up to speed faster than originally planned. Isabella looked at Ethan. "How's Harlan?" "He said 2 hours. That was about 40 minutes ago." She nodded once. She looked tired. Not defeated tired, but the specific tiredness of someone running on the wrong kind of fuel who knows they have to keep going anyway. There was a tension in her shoulders that she wasn't quite managing to conceal, and her left hand was resting in her lap in a way that suggested she was keeping it deliberately still. "You should eat something," Ethan said. She looked at him like the suggestion was mildly absurd given the circumstances. "I'm not saying it fixes anything," he said. "I'm saying Harlan has an hour left, and there's nothing you can do in this room right now, and you've been running since Friday." A pause. She looked at the coffee table. "There's food in the kitchen?" "I'll figure it out." He went to the kitchen and found enough to put together sandwiches, which felt ridiculous under the circumstances, and was also the most practical thing he could do. He brought them back on a plate and set them on the coffee table and sat down and ate one, and Isabella, after a moment, picked one up and ate most of it without seeming to notice she was doing it. "My accident," she said, not looking at him, not entirely addressing him either, more like speaking out loud. 3 years ago. I was driving back from a supplier meeting and a truck ran a red light." She paused. "I used to think it was the worst thing that happened to me. The adjustment, learning to exist in a body that didn't work the way it used to." She looked down at her hand. "And then something like this happens, and you realize the worst thing isn't always the most visible thing." Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. "The accident wasn't connected to any of this?" "No, genuinely an accident. I've checked." She set down the rest of the sandwich. "Although there are days I wonder if Marcus looked at it as an opportunity. If he accelerated what he was doing because he thought I was weakened." A pause. "He underestimated how much having nothing left to lose clarifies your thinking." Ethan looked at her. She caught the look. "I know," she said quietly. "I know that's not just mine." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the evening was doing its ordinary things. Lights coming on in the houses down the block, someone's music drifting from an open window a few doors down, the distant sound of a car that needed its exhaust looked at. "She would have liked that you're doing this," Ethan said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out of the same place as the things you say at 2 a.m. when you're tired enough to be honest. Rachel, she'd have had opinions about the approach. She always had opinions about approach, but she would have liked that someone was finishing it. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry I didn't know about her sooner. I'm sorry I didn't look harder at why people were leaving. You had your own things." "That's not an excuse." "No," he agreed, "but it's true." Harlan's voice came up from the basement stairs. "I've got something." They both looked toward the hallway. Ethan stood up. Isabella moved toward the door. Garrett ended his call and was already crossing the room. The preliminary report was 14 pages. Harlan had printed it, an actual physical printout, which felt both old-fashioned and correct for the moment. He laid it on the folding table and talked through it, in the flat, efficient way of someone who has spent decades translating complicated financial wrongdoing into language that non-specialists could follow. Account numbers, transfer sequences, amounts, dates, the shell company chain that moved the money across 3 jurisdictions, the correspondence that tied the authorization to Marcus Vale's access credentials. And at the end, the section drawn entirely from Rachel's files, the original documentation, time-stamped 4 years earlier, proving that the fraud had been known internally, reported internally, and suppressed. "This is enough?" Isabella asked. "This is more than enough to open a federal investigation and secure an arrest warrant," Harlan said. "Whether it's enough for a conviction is a question for prosecutors. But as a basis for stopping someone from boarding a flight to Geneva tonight?" He looked at her over his reading glasses. "Yes, this is enough." Garrett was already calling his contact, Bob. Marcus Vale's flight was scheduled for 9:45 p.m. At 7:30, 2 federal agents made contact with him in his apartment building lobby. Ethan didn't see this happen. Garrett got a confirmation call at 8:15, and he came to the sitting room doorway and said 2 words. "He's detained." Isabella sat very still for a moment. Then she said, "Okay," and it came out different from how she'd been saying things all day. Quieter, more air in it, like something that had been held tightly for a long time had just been given permission to release. Ethan was sitting on the couch. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor and thought about Rachel at 32, sitting at a desk somewhere on the upper floors of Sterling Horizon, looking at numbers that didn't add up, understanding what she was looking at, deciding not to look away. He didn't cry. He was too tired to cry, and also he was in someone else's house, and also there would be time for that later when he was alone and didn't have to hold himself together for anyone. But something shifted in his chest, a weight that hadn't moved in 4 years, locked in place by the specific grief of not knowing, of losing someone without understanding why, of raising a daughter alone and carrying the questions without ever getting close to the answers. He didn't have all the answers yet. He knew that. The investigation would take time. There were things still to learn, and some things maybe never to learn. But tonight, Marcus Vale was not on a plane to Geneva. Tonight, Rachel's files were in the hands of people who would use them the way she'd built them to be used. His phone buzzed, a text from Donna. "Lily's asleep on our couch. She's fine. Take your time." He looked at the text for a moment. Then he typed back, "Thank you. I'll be there soon." He looked up. Isabella was watching him from across the room with an expression he couldn't fully name. Not pity, not sympathy exactly, something more like recognition. The specific recognition of one person who has been through something hard looking at another person still in the middle of it. "Go get your daughter," she said. He nodded. He stood up, picked up his jacket, and for a moment just stood there in the middle of that sitting room in a house that wasn't his, in the middle of a story that had started 4 years before he knew he was in it. "Thank you," he said. He meant it for several different things at once. "Thank Rachel," Isabella said. He put on his jacket and went out into the night air, which was cool and quiet and smelled like the city after a long day, and he drove to Donna's house and carried Lily to the car without waking her, her head heavy against his shoulder, and he drove home through streets that were dark and ordinary and completely unchanged, and he thought that tomorrow there would be more to deal with. Investigators, questions, the long, slow machinery of justice beginning to turn. But tonight his daughter was asleep in the back seat, and the man who had silenced his wife was not on a plane, and the thing Rachel had built so carefully in the dark was finally, at last, out in the light. The investigators arrived on Monday. Not dramatically. No convoy, no visible badges being flashed in the lobby. Nothing that would tip off the building's staff or shareholders or the financial press, which had a particular appetite for Sterling Horizon stories given the company's size and Isabella's profile. They came in 2 cars, 4 people, and went directly to a conference room on the 31st floor that Isabella had reserved under a routine internal meeting label. Ethan knew this because Garrett told him in a brief text at 7:52 a.m. while Ethan was standing in the school drop-off line with Lily, watching her climb out of the car with her backpack and walk toward the entrance without looking back, which was a new thing she'd started doing, not looking back. He wasn't sure if it was growth or if it was something else, but he watched her go through the doors and then pulled forward in the line and read the text and thought, okay, it's starting. He went to work. B2 and B3, the same route, the same cart, the same squeak. The building felt no different from the outside. Same marble lobby, same security desk, same cluster of people waiting for elevators at 8:30 in the morning with coffee cups and laptops and the particular Monday morning energy of people who had not yet decided whether this week was going to be acceptable or not. Nobody on the maintenance level knew anything was happening. His supervisor, a man named Pete, who communicated almost exclusively in grunts and clipboard gestures, handed him his assignment sheet and moved on without a word. He cleaned the parking structure with the attentiveness of someone trying to stay in the present tense. It was harder than it sounded. At 10:15, he got a call from a number he recognized as the townhouse. It was Isabella, which surprised him. She was supposed to be in the building. "I need you to come up," she said. "The investigators want to speak with you." He stopped walking. "I'm on shift." "I know. Pete has already been told there's a scheduling conflict. He's not happy about it, but it's handled." A pause. "Ethan, they need your account of finding the wallet. The chain of custody, everything from Friday night forward." He leaned the mop handle against the wall. "Okay, give me 10 minutes. The conference room on the 31st floor was smaller than the executive ones on 34. A working room, not a display room, with a rectangular table that had seen better decades and chairs that didn't match in the specific way of rooms assembled from whatever was available. The 4 investigators were arranged around one end. Isabella was at the side, her wheelchair positioned at the corner of the table. Harlan was there too, which Ethan hadn't expected, with his reading glasses and his printed report, and the look of a man who had slept 4 hours and didn't mind. The lead investigator was a woman named Delaney. Compact, direct, the kind of person who let a silence run a few seconds longer than comfortable to see what came out of it. She shook Ethan's hand and told him to sit, and asked him to walk through the events from the night he found the wallet in as much detail as he could manage. He did. He told it the same way he'd told Isabella, without embellishment. The time, the location, the weight of the wallet, what he'd seen when he opened it. He told them he'd taken it home. He told them he'd thought about keeping the money. Delaney looked at him when he said that. Not judgmentally, more like she was filing the information. "Why did you tell us that?" she asked. "Because it's true. Most people wouldn't include that detail." "I know." He met her eyes. "But if I'd kept the money, none of this would have happened. The drive would have been lost, Rachel's files would have stayed buried, and Marcus Vale would be in Geneva right now." He paused. "The only reason we're in this room is that I didn't take something that wasn't mine." Seemed worth being straight about why. Delaney made a note. Not a reaction exactly, more like acknowledgement. She moved on. They were with him for 90 minutes. They asked about his relationship with Rachel, how she'd spoken about her work at Sterling Horizon, whether she'd ever brought home documents or discussed specific colleagues. He answered everything as honestly as he could, which meant saying, "I don't know," quite a few times, and saying she didn't tell me quite a few times, and once having to stop for a moment when Delaney asked how Rachel had explained leaving the company, because the answer, she said she was tired and needed to rest, landed differently out loud in this room than it had in his head for 4 years. "Are you all right?" Delaney asked. She said it like a logistical question, not a therapeutic one, which paradoxically made it easier to answer. "Yeah," he said. "Keep going." When they were done with him, they thanked him and told him he'd be contacted with follow-up questions as the investigation developed, and that there would likely be a formal statement process. Ethan nodded and stood up and looked at Isabella, who gave him a small nod that meant something between "you did fine" and "thank you," and he went back downstairs and finished his shift. The thing nobody tells you about the beginning of justice is that it looks almost exactly like waiting. The days after Marcus Vale's detention moved slowly and with the specific bureaucratic pace of official processes. Investigators coming and going, legal teams being assembled, a quiet internal announcement at Sterling Horizon that the CFO was on an indefinite leave of absence that fooled approximately nobody who worked in the building. Ethan heard about it from a woman named Gloria in the cleaning crew, who heard it from someone in accounting who'd been called into an interview with the compliance team. "Something big is happening," Gloria said, loading supplies into a storage cart. "Third compliance interview I've heard of this week." Ethan said. "You hear anything? You're down in the executive parking, right?" "I just cleaned the floors, Gloria." She gave him the look that people give when they think you know more than you're saying but can't prove it, and went back to loading her cart. He went home that evening and sat at the kitchen table and stared at the utility bill that had come in the mail, which was overdue, and thought about the particular indignity of having been part of something significant and still coming home to an overdue utility bill. The two things coexisted without resolving each other. That was just how it was. He paid what he could online and made dinner and helped Lily with a reading assignment and put her to bed and sat up for a while afterward, not doing anything in particular. He called his sister in Cleveland, which he didn't do nearly enough. "You sound weird," she said within about 90 seconds. "I'm fine." "You always say that. You sound like someone who's had a very strange week and isn't going to explain it." "Work stuff," he said. "Ethan." "I'm okay, Dana. Genuinely. I just wanted to talk." There was a pause. Dana was 4 years older than him and had known him his entire life and had a particular skill for detecting when he was being technically honest without being fully honest. "How's Lily?" "She climbed to the top of the big climbing structure at Waverly Park last weekend." "Oh, that thing is terrifying. I've seen pictures." "She looked very proud of herself." "She's Rachel's daughter," Dana said, and the way she said it was fond and a little sad. The way people said things about Rachel now, always with that edge of past tense that 4 years hadn't smoothed out. "Yeah," Ethan said, "she is." He went to bed without feeling particularly better or worse, which he decided to count as neutral. And neutral was fine. The call that changed the pace of things came on a Thursday afternoon, 12 days after Marcus Vale's detention. It was Delaney. "Mr. Carter, we've completed the initial phase of the financial forensics, and we're moving to formal charges. The documentation from the drive, your wife's files, has been authenticated by 2 independent forensic accountants." A pause. "I wanted you to know before it went public." "When does it go public?" "Tomorrow morning. There'll be a press release from our office. Sterling Horizon's legal team is being notified this afternoon." He was in the parking lot of Lily's school, 15 minutes early for pickup, sitting in the car with the engine off. Through the windshield, he could see the school's front entrance, the painted mural on the wall beside the doors, animals and mountains, and the school's name in bright block letters. "What happens to him?" Ethan asked. "Marcus Vale faces federal charges for securities fraud, wire fraud, and financial crimes across 3 jurisdictions. We're also, and this is preliminary, I want to be clear about that, we're also looking at potential charges related to witness intimidation in connection with your wife's departure from the company." The school doors opened and kids started coming out. "You think someone hurt her?" Ethan said quietly. "I think someone made her afraid enough to walk away from evidence of a $90 million fraud and stay quiet about it until she died. Whether that rises to criminal conduct that can be proven in a courtroom is a question we're working to answer." Delaney's voice was careful, not cold. "I want to be honest with you. We may never be able to conclusively prove that her illness was anything other than what it appeared to be. Her medical records have been reviewed. There's nothing definitive. What we can prove is the intimidation, the suppression, the cover-up." The kids were streaming out now. He could see Lily's purple backpack in the crowd. "It's something," he said. "It is," Delaney said. "And Mr. Carter, the documentation your wife left is the reason this case exists at all. Without it, we have a drive full of fabricated material and a blackmail note and a circumstantial case that could take years to build. With it, we have a complete evidentiary record that nobody is going to be able to argue their way around." A pause. "She did the work." "She always did the work," he said. Lily spotted his car and changed direction. He raised his hand and she waved back with the whole-arm enthusiasm of a 7-year-old who has had a full day and is ready to be in proximity to someone she trusts. "Thank you for calling," he said to Delaney. "We'll be in touch about next steps." He hung up and got out of the car and crouched down as Lily reached him, and she barreled into him the way she did when she'd had a good day and had things to report. "Madison brought a frog to school," she said into his shoulder. "A real one, in a jar. Mrs. Peterson made her put it in her backpack, and then you could hear it jumping around inside, and it was really funny." "What kind of frog?" "A green one." She pulled back and looked at him. "Were you crying?" "No." "Your eyes look like you were." "I was just sitting in the sun." She studied him for a moment with the particular skepticism of someone who has heard this explanation before and does not find it fully convincing, but decided not to push it. "Can we get ice cream?" He stood up and took her hand. "Yeah," he said. "Let's get ice cream." Oh. The press release went out Friday morning, and the story moved fast. By noon, the financial news networks were running it. By mid-afternoon, it had crossed into general news. Sterling Horizon's stock dropped sharply in the first hour, and then partially recovered when Isabella released a statement saying the company had cooperated fully with investigators, that the fraud had been perpetrated by a single executive without board knowledge, and that comprehensive auditing and restructuring would begin immediately. Ethan watched approximately none of this. He was at work. His phone buzzed enough times during his shift that he eventually turned it face down in his pocket and stopped checking. Most of the texts were from Dana, who had clearly seen the news and connected enough dots to arrive at the vicinity of the truth. One was from Garrett, just the words held well, which he understood to mean the company had survived the initial news cycle without collapsing. And one, near the end of his shift, was from a number he'd saved simply as IV. It said, "Call me when you can." He called her on his break, sitting on a concrete ledge near the service entrance. "How are you holding up?" Isabella asked. "I'm at work," he said, which was not an answer to the question, but somehow also was. "I saw." She sounded tired, the kind of tired that came from 12 days of controlled crisis management. "The board convened this morning. They're asking me to lead the restructuring personally, full authority over the audit and the executive reorganization." A brief pause. "Which I was going to do anyway, but it's better with their explicit mandate." "That's good." "It's a great deal of work." She said it without complaint, more like she was locating herself in the landscape of what came next. "Listen, the investigators are planning to hold a briefing for relevant parties in the next 2 weeks. Your presence has been requested, as the person who initiated the chain of events." Another pause. "I want you to know that whatever is said publicly about the investigation, your name, the fact that you found the wallet, your role, none of that will happen without your explicit agreement. You have control over what gets attached to you." Ethan leaned his head back against the concrete wall. Above him, the service entrance had a strip of sky visible between two buildings, narrow, gray-white, a pigeon crossing it in the time it took him to exhale. "My name can be used," he said. "You're sure?" "Rachel's name is going to be in this. Her work, what she found, what she tried to do." He watched the sky. "She deserves to have the person who brought her work home be a real person with a name, not just a source." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said, "then that's how it'll be." 2 weeks later, Ethan sat in a federal building conference room in a suit he'd last worn to a cousin's wedding 3 years ago and which still fit, barely, in the shoulders. He'd borrowed a tie from Pete, who had apparently been told enough of the story by someone to stop communicating exclusively in grunts, and instead clap Ethan on the shoulder and hand him the tie without being asked. The briefing was not dramatic. It was a room full of people in professional clothes being walked through a timeline by Delaney and 2 of her colleagues, with projected slides showing account structures and transfer sequences and the corporate hierarchy as it had existed under Marcus Vale's financial oversight. Ethan sat near the back, next to a lawyer Isabella had arranged for him, a woman named Cho, who had the efficient stillness of someone who is always the calmest person in any given room. Marcus Vale was not there. He was in custody, through his own legal team, fighting charges that Harlan had assessed as nearly airtight. At a certain point in the briefing, Delaney clicked to a slide that showed a timeline of the fraud's discovery, and the first entry on it read, "Internal report filed by R. Carter, Sterling Horizon Compliance Division." Below that, a series of entries documenting the suppression of Rachel's report, and at the bottom of the slide, the final entry, "Evidence recovered and authenticated. Investigation opened." It was the first time Ethan had seen his wife's work formally documented in this context. Not as a story, not as a file on a screen in a basement operations room, but as an official entry in an official timeline, in a federal briefing, in a room full of people whose job it was to make this matter. Cho, beside him, noticed something in his posture and placed a hand briefly on his forearm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. After the briefing, there was a period of informal conversation, people moving around the room with coffee cups and document folders. Ethan stood near the windows. Isabella found him there, maneuvering her wheelchair through the cluster of people with the practiced ease of someone who had long since stopped waiting for gaps to appear and had learned to make them. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Still getting used to the suit," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I mean it." He considered the question. Across the room, Delaney was talking to two people from Isabella's legal team. Through the window, the city was doing its afternoon business, unconcerned. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I think there's a version of this where I feel better eventually. I'm not there yet." "That's a reasonable place to be." "It doesn't feel reasonable. It feels incomplete." He looked at her. "I know what he did. I know what he's going to be charged with. I know Rachel's work is going to be part of making that happen. But I still don't know exactly what happened to her, and I might never know. And that part—" He stopped. "That part is its own thing." Isabella didn't offer reassurance. He'd come to appreciate that about her. She didn't fill silences with things that weren't true just to make them more bearable. "Yes," she said simply. "It is." They stood together by the window for a moment, the noise of the room continuing around them. "I want to ask you something," Isabella said. "And I want you to say no if the answer is no, without feeling any obligation in either direction." He looked at her. "When this is further along, the restructuring, the audit, the rebuilding of the compliance division, I want to create a new role. Director of Internal Integrity. It's a new position, doesn't exist yet. It would oversee the compliance reporting system, make sure what happened to Rachel's report can never happen again." She held his gaze. "I want someone in that role who understands what it costs when the system fails. Not a career bureaucrat, someone who has been on the wrong end of it." Ethan was quiet. "I'm not qualified for that," he said. "You have a degree in finance that you stopped using when your wife got sick and you needed to take work that paid immediately," she said. "Garrett looked you up. I asked him to after the second day." She paused. "You're qualified. You've just been doing something else." He looked down at the tie he'd borrowed from Pete. The pattern was small blue diamonds on a navy background, and it was slightly too long, but he'd tucked the end into his shirt. "I'd need to think about it," he said. "Take your time. The role doesn't need to be filled tomorrow." She turned her wheelchair slightly, that small thinking movement he'd come to recognize. "I'm not offering it because you returned the wallet. I want to be clear about that. I'm offering it because you read a blackmail note and a pile of cash in an empty parking garage, and the first thing you did was decide it wasn't yours to keep. That's not a small thing. That's character. And it's not something I can train into a person." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'll think about it," he said again, but it came out differently the second time. But he picked Lily up from school that afternoon, still in the suit, which she found extremely funny. "Why are you dressed like that?" she said, climbing into the car. "I had a meeting." "You look like a dad at a school play." "I am a dad. You know what I mean." She buckled herself in and looked at him with the appraising eye of someone who has opinions about fashion and is not yet old enough to moderate them. "The tie is too long." "I know." "Whose tie is it?" "Pete's." "Who's Pete?" "My supervisor." She considered this. "Why does Pete have a tie?" "That's a question I didn't ask Pete." She accepted this and looked out the window. They drove for a while in the comfortable silence that existed between them on good days. Not empty silence, but the kind that meant neither of them needed to fill it. "Dad?" she said, after a few minutes. "Yeah." "At school today we had to write about someone we think is brave." She was looking out the window, not at him. "For language arts, Mrs. Peterson said it could be anyone, real or made up." "What did you write about?" A pause. "Mom." He kept his eyes on the road, checked the mirror. The light ahead was green. "I wrote about how she worked really hard at her job even when it was scary," Lily said. "I don't know a lot of details because I was little, but you've told me stuff, and I know she was smart, and I know she kept going even when things were hard." She turned from the window to look at him. "Mrs. Peterson said it was the best one in the class." "I believe that," Ethan said. He believed it completely. That evening, after Lily was in bed, he went to the kitchen drawer where he kept things he didn't know what to do with. Batteries that might still have charge, takeout menus, a screwdriver that belonged with the tools but kept migrating, and he took out the small notebook that had been in there since a few months after Rachel died. It was hers. One of her journals, the smaller ones she used for work notes, not the personal writing ones. He'd found it in the pocket of a jacket she'd left hanging by the door, and he'd put it in the drawer, meaning to look at it when he was ready, and then never been ready. He sat down at the kitchen table and opened it. Most of it was work notes, meeting references, account numbers, the shorthand of someone thinking fast on paper. Her handwriting, small and slightly left-leaning, the same as always. He turned pages slowly, not reading everything, just moving through it. Near the back, on a page by itself, she'd written something that wasn't a work note. If I can get it out of the building and somewhere safe, there'll be a record. Someone will find it eventually. Things that are real don't disappear. They just wait. Below that, she'd drawn a small arrow, and below the arrow, NLW. He sat with the notebook open in front of him for a long time. Outside, the city made its nighttime sounds. The radiator in the hallway ticked once and went quiet. Somewhere, a few floors up, the upstairs neighbor walked from one room to another and then stopped. He closed the notebook gently and held it in both hands. Things that are real don't disappear. They just wait. She had known somehow. Not that he would find it, not that things would unfold the specific way they had, but that if she built it carefully and hid it well and held on to the belief that truth had a kind of gravity, eventually it would pull something into motion. Eventually someone would not look away. He thought about the wallet in the rain, the weight of it in his hand, $52,400, and a drive the size of his thumb, and 6 words on a folded piece of paper, and a man pushing a maintenance cart who was tired enough to have every reason in the world to walk past all of it. He hadn't walked past it. He put the notebook back in the drawer, not because he was done with it, but because he needed to put it somewhere, and the drawer was where it had lived, and some things you don't change all at once. He turned off the kitchen light and went to check on Lily one more time, the way he always did. She was asleep, one arm off the mattress, breathing steady. He stood in the doorway for a while, watching her breathe, thinking about finance degrees that had been set aside in positions that didn't exist yet, and files that had waited 4 years in the dark to matter. Tomorrow he'd call Isabella. Tonight, he let his daughter sleep. He called Isabella the next morning, standing in the kitchen before Lily was awake, the early light coming through the window at the low, flat angle that meant autumn was giving way to something colder. "I'll take the position," he said when she picked up. A brief pause. Not surprised, but measured. "You're sure?" "I thought about it most of the night." He poured coffee and leaned against the counter. "I kept waiting to talk myself out of it, waiting to find the reason it was a bad idea." "Did you find one?" "I found several. I'm not qualified enough. I haven't worked in finance in 6 years. I've spent 3 years cleaning parking structures, and I don't know how to exist in a corporate environment without a mop." He drank his coffee. "None of them were the real reason I'd say no." "What's the real reason you'd say no?" "Fear," he said plainly, "which isn't a good enough reason." Isabella was quiet for a moment. Outside his kitchen window, a sparrow landed on the fire escape railing and sat there looking at something in the middle distance. "We'll build the role around what the company actually needs, not around a job description someone wrote in an afternoon," she said. "You'll have resources, a team, authority over the compliance reporting chain. You'll also have a learning curve that I expect will be steep and frustrating, and you'll have to ask for help more than feels comfortable. That's already more honest than most job offers. I don't have the patience for the other kind." He could hear something shift slightly in her voice. Not warmth exactly, more like the particular frankness of someone who has decided to be real with you. "There's something else I want to say about the offer." "Okay." "Part of me knows that giving you this position is the closest thing I can do to repaying a debt that can't actually be repaid, to you and to Rachel." A pause. "I want you to know that I know that. I'm not pretending this is purely transactional or that I'm above wanting to do right by both of you, but it's also genuinely true that you're the right person for this role. I need you to believe both things can be true at the same time." He looked out at the sparrow, which was still on the fire escape, apparently in no hurry. "I believe that," he said. The transition took 3 months, which was faster than expected and slower than it felt from inside it. He gave notice to Pete, who received the news with a long silence, followed by a handshake that lasted slightly longer than necessary, and a second tie. A better one, burgundy, which Pete said he didn't wear anymore since his daughter's graduation, which Ethan accepted without argument. Gloria, in the supply room, hugged him and told him not to become one of those people on the upper floors who forgot where they came from. He told her he'd try. She told him trying wasn't enough. You either did or you didn't, and then handed him a Tupperware container of something she'd made at home that turned out to be the best rice dish he'd eaten in recent memory. He started on a Monday, which felt right. First days should be Mondays. The office was on the 29th floor, not the executive level, which he'd requested specifically and which Isabella had agreed to without pushing back. It was a corner room with a window that looked south over the city, a desk that someone had already stocked with too many pens, and a whiteboard on the wall that still had faint ghost marks from whoever had used it last. He stood in the doorway for a moment, briefcase in one hand, Pete's burgundy tie around his neck, and looked at the empty room. He thought about the parking structure 2 floors underground and 30 stories below, the squeaking cart, the fluorescent lights, the specific loneliness of moving through a building that didn't know your name. He went in and sat down and started work. Whoa. It was not smooth. He'd told Isabella he knew it wouldn't be smooth, and he turned out to be correct in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. The technical re-entry into financial systems and compliance frameworks after 6 years away was manageable. The fundamentals hadn't changed, and he worked nights and weekends to rebuild what had gone dormant. The harder part was the human architecture. Walking into a company where people knew his story, some version of his story, anyway, filtered through 2 months of news coverage and internal gossip and the particular mythology that forms around anyone connected to a corporate scandal, and having to figure out who he was in that context without either leaning into it or running from it. People didn't know how to place him. He wasn't an executive who'd come up through the normal channels. He wasn't an outsider consultant. He was the maintenance worker who'd found the wallet and unlocked the evidence that brought down the CFO, which was the kind of story that made people either treat you with an excess of respect that had nothing to do with you specifically, or with a skepticism about whether you actually belonged in the room. He got both, sometimes from the same person on the same day. He made mistakes. In his second week, he misread the authority structure on a compliance review and sent a report to the wrong level of the chain, which created a minor administrative problem that took 3 days to untangle. In his fourth week, he sat in a senior leadership meeting and didn't say anything for the first 40 minutes because he was still learning how the room worked, which meant a question he should have raised got answered wrong and had to be corrected after the fact. Isabella, who had been in the meeting, stopped by his office afterward. "You went quiet in there," she said. "I wasn't sure I was reading the room right." "You were. The question about the audit sequencing. You knew the answer." "I knew an answer. I didn't know if it was my place to—" "It is your place," she said. "That's the whole point of the role." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to take up the space, Ethan. That's not the same as being aggressive about it. But you have to actually be in the room when you're in the room." He heard Rachel in that, which was not something he said out loud. Rachel had told him almost the same thing once, years ago, about a different situation, in a different context. You have to actually be there when you're there. And the echo of it landed in his chest like a hand pressing gently on a bruise. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "Yeah." He looked at the whiteboard, which now had actual content on it. A compliance review timeline, a restructuring map, 3 open questions about the audit protocol that he hadn't solved yet. "I'll be in the room." Marcus Vale's trial began 7 months after his arrest in a federal courthouse downtown and ran for 3 weeks. Ethan attended 4 days of it. Not every day. He had a job now, a real one, with responsibilities that didn't pause for legal proceedings. But the days when Rachel's documentation was being presented, he sat in the gallery and watched. Cho, his lawyer, sat beside him on 2 of those days. Delaney was there throughout, at the prosecution table, with the same quality of focused quiet she'd had in every room Ethan had ever seen her in. Marcus Vale looked smaller in person than he had seemed as a concept. Ethan didn't know what he'd expected. Someone who looked dangerous, maybe, or someone who looked the way power looks when it's been caught. What he actually saw was a man in his late 50s in a good suit who sat at the defense table with his hands folded and his face arranged in the careful blankness of someone who has been coached extensively and is following instructions. Occasionally, he leaned to speak quietly with his attorneys. Occasionally, he looked toward the gallery, and once his gaze moved across Ethan without stopping, the way you look past someone you don't recognize. On the third day, Rachel's files were formally introduced. Delaney walked the jury through the documentation with the same efficient clarity she brought to everything, and on the projection screen at the front of the courtroom, Ethan saw Rachel's folder structure, NLW-032, displayed in a federal courtroom with her name cited as the originating source. He sat in the gallery and did not look away. He thought about what it meant to spend your working life building a case that you would never see used, to collect evidence and organize it and hide it carefully, and then go home and make coffee and help put your daughter to bed and carry the weight of it in private until you couldn't anymore. He thought about Rachel at 32, deciding that truth had a kind of gravity, writing NLW on a folder and believing somewhere in the part of herself that hadn't given up yet, that eventually someone would pull on that thread. He thought about the rain, the wallet, the specific, unremarkable moment of crouching down to pick up a paper cup near a storm drain and finding instead the thing that would remake the rest of his life. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks in. Guilty on all counts. He was at his desk on the 29th floor when Cho texted him the word. He read it, set his phone down, and looked out the south-facing window at the city, which was going about its business with complete indifference to the fact that something just resolved. He sat with it for a while. The resolution didn't feel the way he'd thought it would feel back when he'd imagined this moment in the abstract. He'd imagined something more complete, more closed. What it actually felt like was quieter than that, less like a door slamming and more like a door that had been standing open for 4 years, finally being allowed to close on its own, gently, with nothing dramatic about it at all. He called Dana. "Guilty," he said when she picked up. She didn't say anything for a second. Then, "Good." "Yeah. Are you okay?" "I think so. Not 100% sure what okay is right now, but something that's close to it." "Do you want me to come down this weekend? I could bring the kids." He thought about his apartment, which was still the same apartment but felt different now. He'd fixed the radiator, finally, and bought Lily a small bookshelf for her room that she'd immediately filled to beyond capacity. "Yeah," he said. "Come down. Lily wants to show you the climbing structure." "I'm terrified of that thing." "She'll make you do it anyway." Dana laughed, and the laugh sounded like family, which was something Ethan hadn't let himself lean on enough, and which he decided, sitting at the desk in his new office with the guilty verdict 12 minutes old and the city going about its business outside the window, to change. The other thing that changed was harder to name and took longer to notice. It didn't announce itself. It didn't happen at a specific moment he could point to later and say, "There, that's when things shifted." It was more like the way a room gradually gets lighter as morning comes. Not a switch being thrown, but an accumulation of small increments that eventually add up to something you can see clearly. He and Isabella had developed the specific kind of relationship that forms between people who have been through something high stakes together and survived it, and now have to figure out what they are to each other in ordinary time. They worked together closely, which meant he was in her presence several times a week in meetings, reviews, planning sessions. They talked about the company a lot. They also talked about other things, not often, and not in ways that either of them would have described as personal exactly, but in the margins of professional conversations, the way people do when they've already established that they can say real things to each other. She told him one afternoon in late spring, when they were both still in her office after a long review meeting and the building had gone quiet around them, that she'd started physical therapy again. Different from before, more aggressive, targeting the injury differently. She said it without drama, almost like a logistical update, but she was looking out the window when she said it in the way of someone who is saying something that costs more than it sounds. "How's it going?" he asked. "Harder than I expected," which is saying something because I expected it to be hard. She turned from the window. There's a possibility the therapist is careful about how she phrases it, a possibility that some of the nerve damage is less permanent than the initial prognosis suggested. If the new approach works. She paused. She says I shouldn't build expectations around it. Are you building expectations around it? A small, dry sound that was close to a laugh. I'm trying not to. That's not the same as not doing it. I know. She looked at him. I'm discovering that trying not to hope for something and actually not hoping for it are completely different skills. Yeah, he said. I know something about that. She looked at him for a moment, and in the look was the acknowledgement of what he'd meant. The 4 years of not knowing, of grieving without resolution, of carrying questions that might never have answers. And neither of them said anything else about it, because sometimes the point of a thing is just that both people understand it has been said. That was how it started, really. Not with anything dramatic. With an afternoon and an honest conversation, and two people who had figured out, slowly and imperfectly, that being real with each other was something they were both capable of, and both, it turned out, in need of. In September, almost a year after a rainy night and a wallet and a decision that cost him $52,000 he didn't have, Ethan and Lily moved. Not far, 15 minutes from the old apartment, same school district, so Lily didn't have to change schools, which had been a non-negotiable. But a house this time, rented, with a yard that was not large but was real, and had a fence and grass that actually grew. Lily had conducted an extensive inspection of the yard on their first visit and declared it adequate, which from Lily was high praise. Moving day was a Saturday in early fall, the kind of day that couldn't decide if it was still summer or had committed to being autumn, and was compromising by being both at once, warm in the sun, cool in the shade. Dana had driven down with her husband and their 2 kids, and the whole operation was loud and inefficient in the specific way of family helping with a move, which is to say there was a lot of carrying things to wrong rooms and strong opinions about box placement, and someone's kid sitting inside an empty box for 20 minutes instead of helping. Lily directed traffic. "That box goes in my room," she told Dana's husband, who had picked up the wrong one. "Which one's your room?" "The one with the window that has the tree outside. I called it." "How does a 7-year-old call a room?" "I'm 8, Lily said, with the magnificent scorn of someone correcting an error that should never have been made. Ethan stood in the front yard in the afternoon sun, watching his family move through the front door with boxes and furniture, and thought about the drawing still folded in his wallet, the one Lily had made of the 2 of them in front of a house with a green yard and a pretend horse. He'd carried it there since the morning she left it on the kitchen table. He'd put it in his wallet the day he found the wallet in the parking structure, some superstition or an impulse he hadn't examined too closely, and it had been there through everything that came after. He took it out now and unfolded it carefully. Orange crayon, slightly faded, 2 stick figures, a house, the horse that might have been a cat. The yard they were standing in had grass that was more yellow-green than the drawing's bright orange version, and the house was a rental with a porch railing that needed painting, and there was no horse, pretend or otherwise. But the essential shape of it was right. The 2 of them, a house, somewhere, that was theirs. He folded the drawing back up and put it back in his wallet. Isabella came to help that afternoon, which had not been the plan, and which surprised him. She appeared at 2 p.m., in the kind of casual clothes he'd only seen her in at the townhouse, with a casserole dish she'd apparently made herself, which he didn't know she cooked, and Garrett trailing behind her carrying a second dish with the expression of a man who has driven many things to many places and has long since stopped asking questions. Lily spotted her from across the yard. "You're the lady from Dad's work," she said. "I am," Isabella said. "He talks about you sometimes." "Does he?" She glanced at Ethan. "Only work stuff," he said. "He said you're smart," Lily said, "and that you don't waste words." She examined Isabella with the frank assessment of a child who has not yet learned that staring is impolite. "What's wrong with your legs?" "Lily, it's all right," Isabella said. She looked at Lily directly, the way she looked at everything, without flinching. "I was in an accident. My legs don't work the way they used to. That's why I use this chair." Lily thought about this. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. Less than it used to." "Okay." Lily accepted this with the clean pragmatism of a child who asks questions to get information rather than to make a point. "Do you want to see my room? I called the one with the tree window." "I heard," Isabella said. "I'd like that." Lily led the way inside and Isabella followed, and Ethan stood in the yard watching them go and thought that this was not a shape he could have predicted a year ago. Not this specific configuration of people, not this house, not any of it. He went inside to help with the rest of the boxes. That evening, after Dana and her family had driven back and Lily had fallen asleep on a mattress on the floor of her new room because the bed frame still needed assembling, and Garrett had long since gone, Ethan and Isabella sat on the front porch with 2 cups of coffee going cold between them and the neighborhood settling into its nighttime quiet around them. "She's extraordinary," Isabella said. She meant Lily. "She's a handful," Ethan said. "But, yeah. She asked me 4 questions while she was showing me her room. Each one was more direct than the last." Something in her voice was different from the office voice, lighter, less structured. "She asked how I drove a car. I told her it was hand-controlled. She wanted to know if she could try it sometime. Please say no." I said maybe when she's older, which she correctly identified as a parenting non-answer. He laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised him slightly. They sat for a while in easy quiet. Down the street, a dog was barking at something and then stopping and then starting again. A light went on in a neighbor's upper window and then off. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "Yes?" "The therapy, the nerve stuff, how is it actually going?" A pause. Not evasion, consideration. "Better than last month," she said. "I have sensation in my left foot that I didn't have in January." She said it carefully, like she was keeping something fragile level. "My therapist says we don't use the word progress loosely." But she also smiled when she said it, which she doesn't usually do. "That's good. It might be nothing. It might be the beginning of something." She looked out at the street. "I've decided I'm allowed to notice it without making it the only thing I'm thinking about. That feels like the correct amount of hope for a person in my situation." He nodded. Then, "I think Rachel would have liked you." It came out simply, without calculation. Just a true thing that had been true for a while and was ready to be said. Isabella was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was even but different in a way he'd learned to recognize. The slightly slowed cadence of someone managing something genuine. "What makes you say that?" "You don't pretend things are fine when they're not. You don't explain yourself more than you have to. And you finish what you start even when it costs you." He looked at his coffee cup. "She was like that. I'm not sure I deserve that comparison." "You unlocked her files. You used what she built. You made sure her name was in the record." He looked up. "She built something and hoped someone would use it. And you did. I think that would have mattered to her." Isabella looked at the street for a long moment. "It matters to me," she said quietly. They sat on the porch until the coffee was cold, and the neighborhood was fully dark, and the only sounds were the ordinary sounds of people living their ordinary lives inside lighted houses, and neither of them was in any particular hurry to go inside. This was not a perfect story. Ethan knew that. Rachel was still gone, and no verdict in a courtroom changed that, and there would still be mornings when he woke up and reached toward the empty side of the bed in the half-second before he was fully conscious. Lily would grow up with a version of her mother built from photographs and other people's memories, and the drawing on the back of junk mail, and a folder on a drive labeled NLW-032, which she would understand more fully when she was older, and even then it would never be the same as having her. The radiator in the new house worked fine, but there would be other things that didn't, other bills, other problems, other nights of sitting at a kitchen table wondering if he was doing it right. He was a man who had made the honest choice on a rainy night, not because he was extraordinary, but because he could not find a way to live with himself if he didn't. And everything that followed had been a consequence of that. Good and hard and complicated and ongoing, the way real things are. But here was what he also knew. Rachel had not been forgotten. She had been the kind of person who built something in the dark and trusted that truth had gravity. And she'd been right. And the thing she built had mattered. And her name was in the official record of a federal case and would remain there. Her daughter was asleep on a mattress in a house with a yard and a tree outside the window, and had stood in front of a federal building on a cold Tuesday morning with her father's hand in hers and been told, in terms she partially understood and would understand more fully later, that her mother was brave, and Ethan Carter, who had pushed a maintenance cart through an empty parking structure on a rainy night and found a wallet that wasn't his and made the hardest, easy choice of his life, was sitting on the porch of a house that was a little bit like an orange crayon drawing and a lot like a second chance, with a woman who had shown him that broken things could still be formidable, drinking cold coffee in the dark. He didn't need it to be perfect. He just needed it to be real. It was